Results are always the best marketing. If you got a great client outcome, great case, whatever it is, right? If you already have the results, then great. That's the hard part. Now you just have to amplify it. I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer.
This is Jessica, Head of Coaching Strategy at Crisp, and today we're flipping the script for another special edition episode to get Michael's take on how to build a brand that earns trust and stands the test of time, how to turn your firm's reputation into a powerful growth engine, and how to hire the right people who align with your culture and drive success.
We ask all sorts of questions during the hiring process, and it depends on the role, right? But you're trying to get a fit for their character. A lot of times it's about putting them in a state of just self-awareness and then determining if the answers they give you hold up consistently across the different types of questions that you're asking.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Hello, welcome back to another AMMA.
Here we are, another episode of the show, Ask Michael Mogill Anything. And, Jessica, we might do one soon with Ask Jessica Mogill Anything. And
It's
I'll
news
be on
to
the
me.
opposite side here asking the questions. But you guys submit them. You submit the questions at 404-531-7691. It could be any question. It could be about anything. It could be about leadership. It could be about operations, team and culture, marketing, health and fitness.
Anything.
Yeah, anything. Speaking of health and fitness, a couple weeks now into the new year, are you still doing what you said you were going to do? Maybe you're listening to this right now in the gym. Maybe you're going for a run. And again, that's assuming you set a health and fitness goal. Maybe you set something completely different. But take an inventory of it. Have you, are you still staying on your whatever your resolution was, whatever your goals were, whatever new habits you wanted to instill? Are you still sticking with it? And if you're not, there's still time to get back on track. So my rule is always that, look, if you're going to miss, just don't miss 2 days in a row, right? Just get back into a habit. And if you have already slipped up, it's easy to be discouraged and judgmental, which you should be. You should be ashamed of yourself. Okay, you should be. You said you were going to do something, and now here you are. But how do you go? How do you move forward from here? And it's taking an inventory of what was the reason, like what stood in the way of you doing this. A lot of time, I try to make things as easy as possible from the standpoint of like trying to control as much of the environment as you can, trying to eat healthy, and you've got junk food everywhere. That's going to make it more difficult. So like get rid of the junk food, for example. Also for me, exercise and getting a lot of like the health stuff, it was always like, it's the first thing you do in the day. I know a lot of people that put the gym at the end of the day, but then they're tired or things run over at the office, and it becomes easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to go tomorrow. But if you get up, this is the first thing you do at 5 o'clock in the morning, then there's no excuse. Just get it out of the way and you're going to feel great for the rest of the day. So it's really eliminating any barriers that stand in the way of doing the thing you're supposed to do. Maybe you need third-party accountability. Maybe, we've talked about this on previous podcasts of like what leads to somebody actually doing the thing they say they're going to do. Well, for one, you've got to be committed to it. So, of course, if it's this would be nice, but it's okay if I don't, and whatever, then you're probably not going to do it. So first off, pick something that's obviously important to you and that you can commit yourself to. Then there's the component of, all right, well, do I have any sort of like third-party accountability? Whether it's a coach, a trainer, whether it's even just, making it public, like you just said, Jessica. And then 3 is like, are you measuring it in some way? Do you have metrics associated with it? And you're like, what do you mean metrics? I just want to get in shape, or I just want to sleep better. Yes, metrics, everything. Okay, you got to make this thing objective. You got to make it quantitative. Mm-hmm. It's got to have a number associated with it. Okay, so with health and fitness, it could be anything. It could be hours of sleep, hours of REM sleep. It could be your weight in pounds. It could be your body fat percentage. It could be the number of calories that you eat. It could be just
endless
steps. Depends on what you want to do and depends on what you want to achieve. So those are the things you can do to set yourself up for success, and write it down, right? because someone's sitting there passively listening and saying, well, here's the thing I'm going to do. And then they have not set any reminders. They haven't put it in their calendar. They just add it to a to-do list. And that's another thing I'd say. Like if you can shift from to-do list to calendar, that is going to make your productivity go through the roof first and foremost, because the to-do list is never ending. You're just going to keep adding things to it. A calendar, it's putting that task on the calendar. You find a spot for it. Like you say, here's 30 minutes for this, or here's 60 minutes for this. And you can actually see your calendar every single day of the week. So that way you know that there's dedicated time for working on the thing that you're going to work on. That's not just personal items, it's business items as well. So the problem with the to-do list is that you put it on a list and then you have to find time for it later. And then you're not going to find time for it later because you're already spread thin. Mm-hmm. That could be a separate episode in and of itself. What do we got this week, Jessica, on the AMMA?
All right. Question number 1. Michael, I'm just starting out and want to build a brand clients can trust. What's the most important thing I should focus on to create a strong and lasting brand? It's a loaded question.
Oh, that's all. Okay. You want to build a brand that clients can trust. I mean, this is broad, but I think the first thing is that what is brand? Brand is your reputation. And it's your reputation, let's say, when you're not in the room. It's like, what do people say about you? What do people say about your firm? What does your community say about you? And the brand is going to exist. It's just a question of, does it exist by default or is it by design? Is it like the brand that you want? I think the first thing I would recommend doing, if the goal is to build a brand that clients can trust and that can hold up over time, is to do the things you say you're going to do. Okay, so honor your commitments. And this goes for honoring your commitments to your team, honoring your commitments to your clients. I know it sounds simple. Maybe somebody wants some secret formula and they say Facebook ads, right? Or they hear like radio or, billboards or something. And it's like, no, those aren't always the things that build brand. I mean, they might, if you've got, a clear, unique value proposition that you've, put out there and you've invested in for, multiple decades, and it's the same message, but that involves being very clear on who you are and who you're for. So it's a loaded question. The first thing is really just honor your commitments. Do the things you say you're going to do. That's number 1. Then number 2, let's say you got that covered. You're like, Mike, I already do that. Then have a clear and unique value proposition, which is you essentially answering why should someone hire you and not your competition. And don't say things like I'm the best or I have the most years of experience, any of that. Just like, what is the reason that client should hire you? I mean, they've got tons of options, right? So why should they hire your firm? And you should be able to answer that question. And if you can't, well, that's the first thing to probably work on. And then once you're clear on that value proposition, it's like, well, how do you get the message out there? Like, how do you break through the noise? And depending on the resources that you have, maybe you don't have, a ton of financial resources, so you can't compete in like large traditional advertising. You're going to have to find other ways to be strategic and creative. And maybe it's social media. Yeah. Maybe it's being active in your local community. Maybe it's doing things that, you have to figure out who you're for, right? And it's better to be loved by a smaller audience than to have a larger audience. Like you put your messaging out there and they're kind of indifferent.
Right.
So you don't have to win over everyone. And you could say, because a lot of times on the PI side, people say, well, I'm for anyone, right? Like anyone gets injured. Well, let's narrow that down, right? And can you narrow it down to certain audiences, men or women? Can you narrow it down to certain age groups and demographics? Can you narrow it down? Maybe you focus on motorcycle accidents, right? Maybe you focus on slip and falls, or construction accidents, right? Construction accidents, construction workers. There's ways you can focus your marketing. And I wrote a whole book on this. Okay, it's called The Game-Changing Attorney. It's the same name as this podcast. It talks about this very, very, very top, this specific topic about building brand. And when you do this right, when you can build a strong brand, it means that you can screw up in a lot of other areas and still the phone will ring. So if you can be known and trusted, then even if your intake isn't as great as you'd like for it to be, the phone will still ring. But if you got everything else dialed in and no brand, then it's going to be difficult to get the phone to ring. Now, ideally, you want it all dialed in. You want a strong brand and strong intake and strong operations, and you want a great team and a great culture and so on. But brand will save your ass. But it's also the most difficult thing to build. And you don't build it overnight. And it's always the sort of thing that you wish you would have started a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But the second best time is right now. And brand is what it's not just what you say you're going to do, it's what you do consistently over time. And coming back to the very first thing I said about honoring your commitments, that's really where it starts. Now, everything else and figuring out your unique value proposition and where you're going to get your messaging out there and like, your niche audiences and all those things, like, yes, those are things you can explore. But the other thing I'll say is just being consistent and not expecting this to be the sort of thing that you figure out in a month or a quarter or maybe even a year. The firms that have strong brands, think about the brands you admire. Think about how long they've been around. Even law firms, right? Think about the law firm brands that you admire. Just look at it from that perspective of how long it's taken them to build that brand. Every single one of them was an unknown at some point.
Right.
So, like I said, you can start today. And if you don't know where to start, check out the book. game-changing attorney.
Perfect. All right, moving on to question number 2. My firm has a solid reputation, but I'm not sure how to leverage it to grow faster. How can I turn a strong reputation into a competitive advantage?
Well, if you've got a great reputation, it already is your competitive advantage. But with most firms, what I've seen is that they've done great work. Let's say they've got a great trial team. They've taken care of their clients. A lot of their business comes by way of referral or word of mouth. And they look at it and say, well, how do we use this to grow faster? And it's because they're not doing one thing, right? And it's promotion, right? You've got to promote. Now, sometimes the idea of this word, the P word, can make people uncomfortable. They'll say, well, we're helping out our clients and we're doing things in our community, but it doesn't necessarily mean we want to market it. Okay, well, how are other people in your community supposed to find out about that?
Yeah.
Right? Because I get this. It's like you want to do a good deed and you want it just to be a good deed. But if your goal is to be able to impact and support many more people, then they probably should know about some of the things that you've got, you're doing and some of the things you've got going on. So whether you've got like great client outcomes, it's an opportunity for client testimonials. It's an opportunity to get more reviews. It's an opportunity to, if you're doing the great things in your community, take some pictures, bring a camera crew, record it, right? So that other people can hear it and see it. Because the thing is, if you don't do it, that doesn't mean your competition's not going to do it. And they're just going to get more known than you are, even if you're the one providing better legal services and a better client experience, and actually you care more about your community. The problem is nobody knows about it. So you have a duty and a responsibility, if you care about making an impact, to advertise and to promote. And it's asking yourself every time you're doing something like this, it's like, well, how would other people know? Okay, and what should they know? And how do we showcase this? And whether it's putting things up on social media, sending out emails, putting it in newsletters, like just documenting it constantly, right? So if you've got a great reputation, that means that all of it is already there. You just have to be able to distribute it better. And marketing is really just an amplification of a message. That's all it is. So if results are always the best marketing, like if you got a great client outcome, a great case, whatever it is, right? If you already have the results, then great. That's the hard part. Now you just have to amplify it and get it out in front of people who don't know you yet and showcase it, whether it's with other prospective clients in your community, whether it's with other lawyers, if lawyers refer cases to you, whatever it is thinking about, well, who should know and how would they know, and then getting that message out there. And internally, we have this mantra that we assume that nobody heard the message, right? So just because you put it out there one time, you made a social post, it doesn't mean the entire city now knows about it, right? Because they get bombarded with other pieces of content. So then it's like tracking in terms of like, well, what was the actual distribution here? Of like how many people saw it, how many people engaged with it, how many people went to the page. Like, let's say you created a blog post around something that you guys did around the holidays and something you did in your community. Well, how many people even visited the page, right? So you can actually start looking at it from a metric standpoint and get obsessed with proper distribution. And sometimes it's not even coming up with new things to showcase. It's really just making sure that the existing things that you're already doing are getting eyeballs on them.
Exactly. Yep. You don't want to be the best kept secret.
That's right.
All right. And to round us out today with question number 3, I am about to hire my first attorney, and I want to make sure I find someone who's going to fit with our firm's reputation and culture. What's one interview question that reveals one's true character?
I don't know if there's just one.
No, definitely not just one.
And there's a lot of pieces to this, but it's like if you could ask this one question, and we ask all sorts of questions during the hiring process, and it depends on the role, right? But you're trying to get a fit for their character. A lot of times it's about putting them in a state of just self-awareness, right? And then determining if the answers they give you hold up consistently across the different types of questions that you're asking. I'll just give a few examples, right? One could be, I want you to describe a professional failure in your career, and what was your part in it, right? And listening to things, them saying I, not like my team, my boss, like that kind of thing, like in terms of deflection, because you want to make sure this is somebody who takes ownership and accountability. Then maybe even asking them around like, hey, tell me about some of the most difficult problems you solved and your part in that. So hearing how they approach difficulty and adversity.
I also, with that one, I like to put a timeline on it. So somebody's not like dusting off my biggest difficult thing was 10 years ago. Like, are they still in the game? So I like to put
Correct.
a timeline on it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, sometimes I'll even ask them, hey, tell me about your worst boss. They don't have to say who it is,
right?
But just to describe them, right? Describe your worst boss. What made that person your worst boss? And hearing whether they talk about, whether they're being very, very negative or whether they're saying, well, whether they take ownership in kind of their part of that. Another simple one is saying that, look, if I went to dinner with 3 of your best friends, how would they describe you? And what would they say about you? All right. And that can put somebody in a state of self-awareness. And then there's always the one of just what's something we don't know about you yet, but we learn about you eventually that could keep us from hiring you. and then hear what that answer is.
Yeah.
But it's a combination of things. I don't know if there's any one question. This is why we do such a thorough hiring process, because there's going to be, there's the phone interview, there's the assessments, there's the test assignment. You can learn a lot about people as they go through this process in and of itself. Then there's in-person interviews, and it's learning about them also from the standpoint of like, well, what are your goals, right? Sometimes you can ask them just, what do you want? And they'll say, well, what do you mean? Like in the firm, just in general, in life, what do you want? What's important to you? What do you value? Why is that important to you? And just following up on these questions, not just having surface level conversations, but going a little bit deeper. Because if this is someone you're going to spend a lot of time with, well, then you want to make sure that this person's a good fit, culturally. And sometimes we've even come up with questions around the core values specifically. So if you have certain core values, let's say one of ours is results driven. You could ask a question around a scenario that would require somebody to be results driven without saying those specific words, or saying like, how would you navigate this type of situation? Or what's a time that you have let your team down when you work collaboratively with a team, and describe that scenario and, how did it go, right? Because if they start giving you answers of like, hey, what are some areas of growth for you or improvement? And they'll say, well, I just care too much, or I work too hard, that sort of thing. And in this day and age, like I really like in-person interviews, because look, with AI and ChatGPT, when you're getting AI answers.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you want to really figure out, okay, who is this human being? And not just for your sake, right? Because of course you want to hire the right fit person, but also for their sake. Because if you bring in someone who is, let's say, not aligned with your culture and not aligned on values, then it's not going to be really great for their career either. So to me, I look at interviews as, there's really two parties here, and it's got to make sense for both. Anything else you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would say also, especially if you're getting kind of towards the end of this, they should do most of the talking in the interview. I think you did a great job there of even explaining, like, we don't want to set them up for the right answer. You should leave things very open-ended. So yes, if our core value is results-driven, we don't want to lead with results-driven. I want to see how you're going to respond in that situation. A couple other things I would even say, back on really even like the timeline thing, I ask people, tell me about the most stressed out you've been in the last 90 days. Because I want to know what is their definition of stress versus what our definition of stress is. I had a girl once tell me she was very stressed from planning a bachelorette party, and that was a very different level of stress than perhaps what she would encounter at Crisp. There's that. And then back to even the character side of things, I like to give situational things. And in this case, if it's an attorney, so client facing, some difficult clients, how would this person respond in these situations? Like you've got an angry client or you've got a sticky situation, but what is their response in actual real life situations? Because those are things you've already experienced and you want to see, can this person plug in there?
The final thing I'll say is, if you actually are interested in hiring this person, you believe they could be a good fit, at the end, instead of saying, do you have any questions for me? Saying, what are 3 questions you have for me, right? Or whatever, put a number to it. Because if you say, do you have any questions for me? You might get no, and that's disappointing, right? Sometimes you can really learn a lot about someone based on the quality of the questions that they ask. So if they come in and they're asking you a question that it sounds like you really didn't do any preparation for this interview because you didn't learn anything about our business, right? You could have gone to our website at least. You could have learned what we're all about. But sometimes they'll ask you really, really great questions around like, well, what's your vision for the firm? Or what do you think is the biggest challenge that you're experiencing right now? And why this role, or how does this role interplay with like the growth goals of the law firm? Right? So, some people could ask interesting questions, but you want to determine if there really is that give a shit factor, where the person is just looking for like any job, or whether they want to work at your firm specifically. And sometimes it's asking them even why, like why us, why our firm?
Yeah.
Right. So like, oh, because you had a job listing open and I've been sitting unemployed for 6 months.
That might be their reason.
But at least they're honest.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not always a bad thing.
Right.
But then say, okay, so why do you want to do this? Or why you over another great candidate?
Yeah.
Let's get some critical thinking going here.
Exactly.
And you can learn a lot about someone. And then the final thing on this with hiring, that's not really this question, but it still relates to hiring, is if they're not a hell yes, like a hell yes, they're a hell no. Anything in between will cause you pain and suffering.
It will. You need to be so excited that you can't stop thinking about this candidate and them joining your company.
That's right.
Yep.
All right.
That's
all we got.
Next time.
See ya.
You've been listening to the Game Changing Attorney podcast with Michael Mogill. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that we can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of Michael's book absolutely free at gamechangingattorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot Michael a text at 404-531-7691 and ask him any question you'd like. You might just hear the answer on the next episode. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it will help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on this episode, see the show notes in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.